Greetings, Embers, newbies, and the peekaboos. Welcome to Back to Ashes. I am your host, Phoenix. This will be your last video of 2024. I will say, from my heart, thank you all so much for sticking with the channel and for putting up with my chaotic mind and sometimes my uploads. I can't put into words how much you all mean to me and how much Back to Ashes has impacted not only my life, but your life as well. Before we get started, if you enjoyed the way I narrate these stories, a subscribe, like, comment, or share would be greatly appreciated. Since we are closing out the chapter of 2024, there will be 24 stories. I will leave timestamps below. That way, if you don't like the genre that's being read, you can skip ahead. I will announce the genre that I'll be reading before I get started. This compilation will be broken up into part 1 and part 2 because it is that long. If you are interested in becoming a member of the channel, that information can be found below as well, also with the Buy Me a Coffee link. I'd also like to take a moment here and recognize the elite members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much. I have not said it enough. I cannot say it enough. I appreciate your dedicated support. Thank you for remaining the pillars upon which this channel stands. I appreciate you. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and close out 2024. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your last dose of 2024's Vocal Melatonin entitled, Your Top Favorite True Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'm going to read the first story, there will be an ad. I'll read the second story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Disclaimer, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes. I would like to throw in a quick bit here. I will be reading these stories the way they are written. I will not be using fluff words. So, if you are triggered easily, this video will not be for you. Let's get started. "911 Story." Here's a quick backstory. I work at a firehouse, not a particularly old building, built in early 2000s. The land that the building is on was donated to the county from a local farmer. Not a small plot either, it was more like 5 acres, kinda suspect. Before the building was built, as far as I can see, it was only used as farmland, according to property appraisers' websites. The area is extremely rural. Now on to the interesting parts. More than one of my coworkers, including myself, have heard drawers in the kitchen open and closed in the middle of the night, silverware being rustled around, also doors being unlocked and ajar that we are for sure were closed the night before. In the beginning, I always thought the kitchen thing was one of the guys getting up for a midnight snack. But when asked, everybody said they didn't get up except for calls, which you go out a different door to go to the bay. No one has a particularly uneasy feeling in the station at all, but it can be unnerving if you're up alone watching TV at night. I set up a camera one night in the kitchen, spare phone set on record, plugged into a charger basically. Got up the next morning and the battery was dead. It was still plugged in, but still to this day will not take a charge. I'll admit, that could be a coincidence, but when you add everything else together, it just doesn't seem like one. Whatever it is, if it's anything, it doesn't seem malicious at all. And the incidents are super spread out and typically during the hot months of the year. It's Florida, so March until about September-ish. Does anyone have any advice or tips on investigating this further? I'm also more than happy to answer any questions you may have. "911 Story." Although I've heard many stories from my uncle about his time as an EMT, this is the story that will stick with me until I die. About 6 years ago, my Uncle Benny's paramedic crew responded to a call from a hotel in Philly, and it was one of the more horrific experiences he's had. The initial report stated that a maintenance man named Mike went to check on room 417 since water had been reported flooding into the hallway, and it was he who found the body. Mike informed 911 that there was a man in the in-suite hot tub who appeared to be deceased, and he was all but hyperventilating as he tried to make his report. Mike relayed that he saw the man and immediately backed out of the room, being careful not to drop his phone into the several inches of water on the floor. My uncle's two-man paramedic team entered the room about 12 minutes later, and they almost gagged at the smell of feces and burning flesh. Benny, who has a stomach of steel, had to press his hand to his mouth to keep from vomiting. The room was filled with steam, and the humidity was instantly making the men sweat profusely. Their grip on their equipment was slipping, and they knew they needed to extract the victim quickly. The naked man was floating in the hot tub, a maniacal grin plastered across his face. From the looks of the man, he had been in the water for a while, since his bruised skin was starting to peel off of his body in long, squishy strips. Benny held his breath and checked for vitals until one of the other EMTs went to get a bag for the body. Even though my uncle saw corpses regularly, this method of death was a disturbing first for him, and something about the whole situation was very unnerving. As Benny placed his fingers on the man's wrist, expecting to feel nothing, he had to choke back a startled scream when the victim's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. It wasn't a corpse. The John Doe didn't show any other signs of being responsive, but when the other EMT went to check the man's eyes for a dilation reaction, his pupils looked slitted, almost like those of a reptile. Benny was weirded out, but dismissed it as a side effect of getting boiled alive like a hard-boiled egg. As the men removed the victim from the bathtub, the man began to thrash. Strips of flesh splattered all over the EMTs. They tried to pin the man down to keep him from hurting himself, but he was shockingly strong. As the last bits of flesh dropped to the floor, Benny saw that it wasn't more skin underneath, it was scales. His partner must have noticed too, because both men began screaming almost in unison. The thing began to growl, and my uncle's normal desire to figure out problems turned into sheer fight or flight response, with flight winning out. He ran from the hotel room, his teammate on his heels. They slammed the door behind them, and a moment later, they heard one of the windows shatter. The men had no idea how to explain to their boss what had happened, but after some phone calls and a few men in black suits appearing, they were given a specific story to follow. They were told to say that a John Doe tried to drown himself and that the mentally unhinged man climbed down the fire escape when his attempt failed. Benny, who was paid extra well to keep his mouth shut, never did tell anyone about his story until he shared it with me the other day. I could tell he didn't want to, but I was the only one in the family that he thought would believe him. The only reason he even shared his ridiculous story is because he thinks something has been stalking him the last few weeks, and he's worried that the creature has returned. I thought he was crazy until I went to his house yesterday and saw a trail of bipedal clawed footprints underneath his windowsill. Now my uncle is missing, and I think I'm the only one that really knows what happened to him. "911 story. First of all, I would like to apologize in advance for any formatting errors, as I know I will get quite upset recounting this. I will refer to myself in the past tense away from my current level and experiences and try to impart on you this story as I stood as a 19-year-old who was an active volunteer firefighter in rural Western Australia. I am pretty sure it was 1999 when it happened. It's quite infuriating how my brain will remember all of something but then be hazy on the dates and such because of the experience. Looking up facts does not rate high when you really seldom ever wish to remember anything of an event at all. I was still working in the town I grew up, being in rural Western Australia. I had varied success as an athlete at a state level, but my passion was my involvement in the local volunteer fire and rescue service. I was only 16 when I joined the active ranks after spending the years prior as a junior in their running team, which was a pretty full-on sport. I enjoyed all things firefighting, rescue, emergency response, and have a real calling for it. But, as I mentioned above, I did have quite a large sporting influence in my life too. I traveled to a nearby town for a field hockey game, and while there, I caught up with an old mate, I will refer to him as V, that I was in the state hockey squad with, and were really close during that time a few years back. But as we both left the state hockey scene and gained employment, we ended up being only about 80 kilometers from each other, but had not realized it until this day. After the game, W and I naturally gravitated toward one another and spent the rest of the night at the bar, just spending time together and catching up on old times, and really enjoying each other's company. Fast forward to midnight, and the bar was closing up as it does, and we both walked toward our cars, which were parked pretty close by, chance with both our intention, even though drunk of driving back to our respective homes, mine being 80 kilometers away on an unsealed road, but pretty straight route, and with W going to drive to his home, which was about 175 kilometers away, by taking the standard bypass past my town and then cutting back down a long section of highway on the other side leading to his home, which was a farm. I wished I had a story now of how we had realized that driving after so much to drink was probably not the best idea after drinking so many beers, but hey, I was about to do the exact same thing, so I didn't feel I should say shit to the guy, and it was probably common back then. But please, I in no way condone or defend it. So we leaned on the boot of his red Commodore and talked and laughed as we finished the rest of our beer. And I remember spending a lot of time giving W shit about his personalized number plate he had on his car that said Crafty, which was an old nickname he had because he was quite good at his hockey ball handling skills, which caught many a good player by surprise, hence the nickname. With promises of catching up again soon, we both parted ways, and I returned home dodging the rural town cop gauntlet and getting home with no problems, probably a little before 1:30 a.m. I showered, got into bed, and then my phone rang for only a second and then stopped, which showed a missed call from W. So, naturally, I thought he might have ended up in my town and wanted to party on, so I tried to call back. But it rang out 3 or 4 times before I gave up and went to sleep. I woke again to the sound of 5 or 6 text messages right after one another, like after you turn your phone back on or get off a flight, and it was about 2:30 a.m., and they were from W. But all of them were gibberish and pretty much all consisted of something like damn and blah blah and other gibberish. So I again tried to call, but after a few attempts, I just messaged him saying if he was around there was room at my place to crash, and if needed, I could get the missus up out of bed to collect him, even though we would both be dead for doing so. Again, I got nothing back. It was about 2:19 a.m. that my fire brigade papers sounded, with notification that there was a motor vehicle accident on the bypass to the south of town. Location unknown, but it was about 2/3 the distance from the main bypass, and that there was a telecommunications van with a yellow flashing light on site, as he was the one who called it in. I was still a little under the weather, so I declined to attend on the first call. But after they sounded the brigade siren repeatedly and set off the pagers again, it was obvious that not an adequate crew had turned out to the station to attend. So I got dressed and got the missus to take me there, which was only a few minutes away. When I arrived, I was the officer in charge, being third in command with no one higher, and there was only 4 firefighters, 5 with me included. So I asked the group and explained that while I had a few beers earlier, that I would not have turned up if I were unable to perform, and while I would not be driving any appliances, I was comfortable to be OIC, and if anyone had a problem with that, then to speak up, and I would gladly relinquish command and leave. As I said, there were only 4 guys turned out, and to be quite cutting, none had any real idea what the fuck was going on with the longest serving, about 18 months in and only just finished his introduction to firefighting a few months back. I digress and apologize. So, with myself in the passenger seat, with 2 others in the main pump, and the other 2 out in front on the last attack, 4-wheel drive, we made our way to the incident, which was expected to be around 40 minutes away. We intersected and began down the bypass after about 20 minutes, and by now the cold air had sorted me out, and I expected to come across not much. Perhaps a car rolled over or not much damage due to the non-urgency of the call, and the fact that operations had not updated us since turnout. I saw the yellow flashing light long before we made it to the incident, and upon arrival, everything changed. It was obvious from the marks on the road leading up that the car had lost control and plowed through a stock fence, and beyond that, there were huge gouges out of the paddock with red paint up the side of a small walled dam that I could not see into, but had a guy in a reflective vest on top of the bank waving a torch. I got out and tasked the 4 others, and then, as part of the 360 DEG appraisal, I walked up the bank and met with the old mates in the vest. The guy in the vest was quite frantic and speaking a mile a minute with huge hand gestures, with his fucking torch flapping about that periodically illuminated a license plate that was pretty submerged but upside down because the car was on its roof in the middle of the small dam with only the back wheels, exhaust pipes, and license plate visible. That license plate said, "Crafty." As a first responder, I believe that you activate a certain mode in times of emergency, and your training and natural abilities come to the front, and as such you perform exceptionally well, and it is only later in the shower or at dinner or another time when the past decides to visit you that you are human. Well, I became human right there. I knew it had to have been at least 2 hours since that car had landed in that dam, because there was frost already over the marks that W's car had made going into the dam. I did walk the perimeter of the dam, looking to see if W hadn't been ejected, but I found nothing. I then returned my focus to the car, 3/4 submerged, and remembered clearly saying, "Oh, mate," in the saddest I have ever heard my own voice. A tow truck arrived at about the same time, and he indicated that he could hitch onto it and skull drag it out and then sort out on the paddock, but I really felt that was unacceptable. I was a swimming pool manager at the time, and as such, a lifeguard. So I felt it best to go in and collect my friend with dignity before the car was recovered. So at about 4 in the morning, in the middle of winter, being about 6 degrees Celsius, I stripped down to my underwear and waded into the dam and made my way to a sunken car that I really hoped did not have my mate in it, and perhaps it was at least a car thief or someone else. Hard, I know. I had an intrinsically safe torch that I remembered being waterproof due to its design in my light hand, with the lanyard tied around my wrist, and I steadied myself with my left hand on the car's chassis and took 8 deep, controlled breaths and dove under to where I assumed the driver's door was. I really had a hard time locating anything, as just the fact the car was upside down really throws your perception of where things are, like door handles and such, and the driver's window was still intact, which was not fantastic. I came up for air and then went in again, and was able to find the door handle and get the door open, which was lucky considering I thought the mud would stop it. I put my back to the AB pillar and used my legs to open the door as much as I could, which was actually quite a long way. I then went back up for air and had to give myself a few minutes to get my breathing sorted, as it was really cold. I ducked back down again and had to literally hold the torch to my temple and could only see perhaps 15 or 20 centimeters in front of me, and I entered the driver's door. I cannot instill the absolute horror and panic that a man feels when 15 centimeters from his face, a white, dead face of a friend appears with eyes slightly open and a mouth that was deformed from a broken jaw. I reacted by jumping out of my skin, and I hit my head on the roof really hard. It was then that I felt an absolute calmness, and I knew it was just a task, and somehow I felt W was calling me a pussy for flinching. I felt and put my left arm over his dangling arms and tried to locate his seatbelt, as he was still strapped in upside down, and I was having some major difficulties locating it in the dark. I went back to the surface and had to catch my breath, and upon my return, I continued searching for the buckle, and when I finally found it, I could not release the seatbelt. It did not matter how much I pushed that button and pulled on it, it just would not release. I was running short on air, but did not want to go get air because I knew I might have difficulty locating the seatbelt buckle again, and I thought that it was so close that only 1 or 2 more seconds and it would come free. Well, my prayers were answered, and I finally got the buckle to release, to which I tried to return to the surface to get air, and then return for the body. However, when I tried to push back and got the car door to the surface, I felt my right wrist snag on something in the car, and while I tried to just break the lanyard, it was much too strong, and my frantic tugging only made the torch flap about, illuminating sections of dashboard and W's upper legs and bare stomach, which made me freak out even more. I was already short on air, and now I was doing that gulping action that everyone has done when they hold their breath a little too long, and I was really getting scared. It was then that I just stopped. Not because of anything profound or an incident. I really just stopped and did nothing. It felt as though I wasn't gasping for or dying for air anymore. And I calmly thought to direct that torch at whatever was snagging to calmly free it and let myself go. When I grabbed the torch, I pointed it at my wrist with my left hand and saw that my lanyard had become stuck around the unclasped buckle of the seatbelt that I had undone. I knew exactly where the issue was, and I was trying to unloosen it before the buckle and I really couldn't do it. And it was like a warmth came over me. For that few seconds, the fear was returning, and I was still trapped. It was then that time just stood still, and with that untamed torch flapping around, because I was concentrating on the snag, that I just stopped as the torch illuminated W's face, and he was just looking right into my soul with normal open eyes and a slight smile on his face. It was as if W was saying, It's okay. You are a useless fuck because you don't have to worry about it, and I have got your back. Just let me sort it out and get you out of trouble as usual." It was then that W's hand moved purposefully and unhooked the caught lanyard and, just for lack of a better word, left. After resurfacing and coughing while regaining my lungs, I looked to the dam bank and the other firefighters were screaming and pointing, etc. And one of them was right there in the water with me. Such a frantic state he was in. After I collected W, took him to the dam bank, and put him in an ambulance, I started to resolve the scene and talk to the guys, and I was made aware of their side of the story. While I had gone under and surfaced a few times, I apparently went under, and as time went by, the guys got increasingly worried when I did not resurface. I explained that my lanyard had got stuck and that I had to get it free before I left out my experience with W. However, the guys would not let it go. Apparently, I was underwater for over 15 minutes, and after only around 1 minute, one of the guys stripped off and dove in after me. He, to this day, tells me that he got a hold of my legs and with both feet on the car, could not budge me. He even explained that he dove down many times to feel around to see where I was, trapped to free me, but could never find something holding me in there. And he swears he ran his fingers down both of my arms, seeing as they were the only two things that he thought could be caught. I woke up every morning at 2:19 a.m. for months after that, until W visited me and told me that it was not my fault and to forgive myself. I have never woken up at 2:19 a.m. again. Every day I miss my friend. I love you, W. I'm sorry for the absolutely ridiculously long story, guys, but I decided to just type it all out for the experience and not edit out anything. I feel better to have been able to get that off my chest, and I thank you all for listening to my story. Backwoods Creepy. Some quick background. I was visiting the Southwest in 2021. I flew out to Tuscan, stayed a couple of days, then rented a car and drove out to the Grand Canyon and took Route 46 to Gallup, stayed there, and ended my trip in Taos. I took most of the trip alone, but my boyfriend ended up meeting me for the time I spent in Tao. He had never seen the Southwest, and as a 32-year-old woman traveling alone, he felt better accompanying me on the last leg of the trip. I have always loved Arizona and New Mexico since I was little. My grandmother had a trailer in Tuscan. She would snowbird off to escape the Northeast winters. I would visit her and first step foot in New Mexico when I was 17. I instantly fell in love with it. The energy is like no other. I respect the land and the culture out west and try to stay humble towards the dangers, as they are very different than New York and New Jersey. My boyfriend was not crazy about Taos. He said he felt strange, out of place there, and inexplicably just depressed and down. I felt very good. I noticed an electric in the air, and I appreciated the overall spirit. On our last night, he wanted to check out Santa Fe, which he loved. We had a good time, but after dinner, we had to start heading back because we had a very early flight home. We were driving back up towards Taos. It was around 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and we are talking and goofing around. Suddenly, he decides to say the word you're not supposed to say. I made him promise not to say it here. He did it anyway and starts laughing. I was so upset with him. I said that he was disrespectful to dismiss things that he knows nothing about. He brushed it off, and I said it's a bunch of lore and nothing is going to happen. We are staying in an old 1960s trailer out in a wide open pasture. Other trailers are sprinkled around, but all in all, it's fairly remote. We get back at around 11 and we pack for the early flight. By the time we get to sleep, it was 12, and we realize this is more like a nap more than it is actual sleep. Anyways, lucky for me, I am a deep sleeper, so I passed out right away. Around 2 or 2:30 a.m., he wakes me up, but I noticed he is talking fast and anxious with a lump in his throat. "Get up, come on, get up, we have to get out of here." I thought at first it was because we maybe overslept and he was anxious about missing the early flight. It wasn't until I saw his face in the dim light and the wall sconce. He had terror in his eyes. His eyes were wide and watery. He looked like he was about to crack the fuck up. Now he is a big, tough Italian Puerto Rican dude who's not really afraid of much. I looked at him and said, "Is everything okay?" He said, "No, it's not. I'll tell you when you get in the car. I can't tell you now. I can't tell you until we get out of here." Now, I'm a little freaked out. We pack the suitcases into the car and head out on our 3-hour trip to Albuquerque. I say to him, "What happened to you?" He tells me he was trying to fall asleep, and just as he drifted, he awoke to someone whispering. He got up and looked out of the windows to see if someone was outside. There was no one. He got back in bed and started to hear footsteps outside, and the whispers began to get louder and louder. He said they sounded like they were almost surrounding the trailer, swirling and wisping around like dry leaves on a fall day. Then, the most terrifying part, he said, were the footsteps began to move to the roof. Something was walking on the aluminum trailer's roof. He said he sat stiff as a board as this went on for the entire 2 hours I was asleep. As we were driving, it was pitch black, and I felt like something shifted in the air. The beautiful canyons we drove through just yesterday began to take on a new meaning. The night felt extra dark, and the energy just felt very wrong. I don't know if we were just extra jumpy, but cars would just appear out of nowhere behind us, and then pass or disappear. At one point, as we rounded a bend, we see a huge elk standing proud on the side of the road. He didn't appear. He was trying to cross the road. He just stood still, almost acting as a guardian to the canyons. It's like he was the king of all majestic. I looked at the tank and it was getting uncomfortably close to empty. A rookie mistake to think that we'll just get gas on the way to the airport applies the same way as it does back home. My boyfriend starts freaking out. I tell him when we get closer to Santa Fe, we will see more open functioning gas stations. And as I said that, the gas light comes on. As we get closer to Santa Fe, I realized I was really wrong. Every station we saw was closed, pumps turned off, everything. I started to get nervous. Finally, after nearly 2 hours riding on empty, we see a station. I go into the store to get a coffee. I'm very groggy and wobbly, but feel strange the moment I go inside. The counter woman, who was native, looks shaken and appears to be watching me the entire time. I am getting coffee and trying to find the right size lid, and I see her watching me from the other side of the cups. When I turned, she looked the other way. Her body language was upset. I asked my boyfriend if he had the same experience as I did when he came in to fix his coffee and pay for the gas. He said he did. Even stranger was that he saw an elder native man that was leaning against the counter, just silent, watching him and his every move. He'd go to the coffee station. The man would turn and watch. He said the elder man's body language appeared to be much calmer than the woman's. The thing is, I was very hyper-vigilant in the gas station, but I do not recall this man. My boyfriend, to this day, swears the man was there just watching. He can't believe I never saw him. Anyways, We got to the airport, and the strangest stopped as soon as we boarded the flight. The whole night seemed to be a long, strange fever dream. I just am looking for insights. I am fairly certain what we experienced was what I think it is. I am curious about the man in the gas station. I wonder if the man and the woman knew what was happening. Backwoods creepy. My 3-year-old son suffered from chronic ear infections last year, which led him to having high fevers. I slept with him on this particular night because I needed to give him Tylenol throughout the evening to keep his fever down and keep him comfortable. I set my alarm to wake me up at around 2:30 a.m. When I woke up, I went into the kitchen to get the Tylenol. I noticed a bright light shining into the apartment from our deck door, which also illuminated part of the woods behind the apartment. When I went over to see what it was, it turned out to be a car with those bright LED headlights in the parking lot to the far back right of the apartment. I figured they were dropping something off. I saw the movement of what resembled a dog walking around the woods. I started to think that the lady who usually walks her dog, a cute little corgi, in that area purposefully faced her car in that direction so she could see while she walked her dog. As it got closer, I realized that there was nobody out there walking a dog, and there was no dog. I don't know what it was that I saw, but I'll describe it in the best way that I can. At first, it looked just like a dog, corgi size, but as it walked closer, it looked like your average house cat. Then it looked like a black bear, and then it looked like a koala. I live in North New Jersey, farmland and lots of woods, and there are no wild koalas here. At this point, my heart is pounding out of my chest, and of course I am scared. The fear I felt was like a primal type of fear I have never felt before. I ran to my bedroom to wake up my boyfriend, and I shook him awake very roughly. I said, "You gotta come see this." He was a bit annoyed with me. When we look outside together, we see this thing getting closer, and it looks like a skunk now. White stripe down the center with the perky, fluffy tail. I said, "Oh, it's just a skunk," with a little chuckle. I felt a bit embarrassed that I woke him up over a damn skunk, but at that moment, I also felt relieved. However, I was mistaken. As I walked, it looked as if it was struggling to find a form. I thought it looked like it was falling apart, but also coming back together again at the same time. I know this doesn't make sense, but it's hard to find the words for what we saw. After the skunk formation, it looked like a person crawling on the ground and some type of fur or skin attached to them around the leg. Then it changed again and looked like a raccoon, groundhog, black bear, cat, koala, deer, and skunk. The part that stuck out to me the most was that whatever it was seemed to be coming apart or shedding, but at the same time it was growling. Whoever had their headlights on turned them off as it went deeper into the woods. This happened pretty quick. I'd say it was only about a couple of minutes from start to finish. He ended up going back to bed, but I couldn't sleep after that. So I grabbed a flashlight and shined it into the woods to see if I could see it again. But it was gone. I also opened the door to see if I could hear anything, but I couldn't. It was very quiet. I had a very hard time going back to sleep that night. My boyfriend wasn't scared, but he was confused and stunned. He didn't know what to make of it. I was scared and very creeped out. I know if I hadn't woken him up to see it for himself, he most likely wouldn't believe me and would have just chalked it up to me being groggy from just waking up or it just being an animal. Unfortunately, I know what I saw, and I will never forget it. Cabin in the woods. I have a rather big forest close to my home. Nothing special about it, neither creepy nor mystical, and not pretty as well. Just a forest with tree bushes and so on. I used to go there a lot with my dog since it was so conveniently close, and he could run around on his own while I was minding my own business. Around 2 or 3 years ago, I went there rather late. I'd say it was probably around 9 p.m., where it started to get dark soon, but I still wanted to go for a short walk. I always stayed on the tracks so I don't disturb any wildlife or damage the plants. As it gets later and darker, I'm somewhat in the middle of the woods, but I felt all good since I know every small track there and I always would find my way back home. As I'm walking, I hear some weird noises rather close to my left. I couldn't make out what it was, but it sounded like a mixture of hissing and spoken words, but definitely nothing I had ever heard before. It didn't sound like anything unearthly, as stupid as that might sound. Then my dog comes bursting out of the bushes, his tail clamped between his legs, totally focused on me and desperate to get going. He knew there was something weird going on. As I try to calm him, I take a look into the woods, and there, maybe 20 meters away, there is a small cabin I hadn't noticed before, and a pair of deep red eyes staring directly at me. No movement, no blinking or anything. They just stare right at me. I'm struck and somehow can't really move, but I kept staring into those eyes. They were seriously red. I don't know how to describe it, but again, nothing I have seen before. I knew that something was there that didn't belong there, but I don't know what it was. It was like I was dreaming, a very eerie feeling, and the air was dry and crisp as hell, and I felt really calm for some reason. I just told my dog to follow me and went away slowly. I never looked back, but I know for sure that if I had looked there, the eyes would still have been staring at me. After a couple of meters, I suddenly wake up from my trance, and I just hit it. I'm full speed running with my dog through the forest, scared out of my mind, and I'm crying big time while I'm running. I don't even know why and what really happened, but everything just felt so freaking wrong, and I just wanted to get as far away as possible from this place. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't think I really want to find out, to be honest. The only animals that live in that forest are deer and boars, but the eyes were at human face height, so somewhat between 1.5 meters and 2 meters in height. Never stepped foot into the forest again, but I haven't heard from anything weird going on there as well. Just to make sure, no, I didn't do any drugs or comparable things before going there. I'm pretty sure weird shit would have happened to me if I had stayed. Cabin in the woods. Came here hoping someone could share similar experiences or give insight. I took a trip to stay in a cabin in the middle of the woods, high up in the mountains of the city of Ranger, Georgia, United States of America. This neighborhood was 30 minutes up in the mountains away from civilization, and even the cabins were even spread apart. The front deck of the cabin was completely exposed to the woods, so I acknowledged that any animals could stroll along if they pleased. But I stayed there for about a week, and me and my boyfriend sat outside on the front deck every night, very late, and at no point felt endangered. It was peaceful, with fireflies out and sounds of crickets every night. Until the 5th night, it was eerily dark too. The moon was covered heavily. It was about midnight, and all of a sudden, I didn't feel peace like I did those other nights. The forest went completely quiet, and I felt a horrible sense of dread. I genuinely feared for my life. I sat there in my chair looking out into the dark forest, trying to rationalize and calm myself down that it was my mind playing tricks. But all of a sudden, my boyfriend said out loud that he felt unsafe. I told him I felt the same and we ran inside. The cabin has 3 floors and we were able to climb out the window and sit on the roof because we wanted to still be outside and relax. Didn't matter how high up I was. I felt something truly evil and stayed inside. The only other time I felt something so evil or like someone was watching was when I had a few paranormal experiences at a haunted house. Georgia doesn't really get mountain lions. Maybe a bear, but it didn't feel that way at all. Oh, holy crap, I just remembered something about that night. I remember hearing a blood-curdling scream, and we pulled out a flashlight. Turns out it was a gray fox, and they made very loud and scary screaming sounds. The weird part was that the fox was running and had its ears and tail down. This was in June, and I just read that foxes scream like that when it's mating season, or if they're in danger. Their mating season is in winter and spring, so they too were also afraid of something. Cabin in the woods. I was in Vermont to see some friends, and we found a cabin deep in the woods through Airbnb to spend the night. I had maybe 1 to 2 drinks while no one else drank. It was a good day, full of laughter, and I was now the only one left awake at midnight. I was downstairs in the living room, enjoying the cabin and contemplating life. There were no blinds or curtains on any windows in the cabin, which I found very strange. There were many windows, and each showed the pitch-black darkness of the wilderness outside. I went upstairs to sleep in a room shared with my best friend in a separate bed. Before lying down, I stared out of the window of the room, thinking again how odd it was that there were no blinds or curtains. I remember thinking how someone could probably spot me from a mile away through this window. I lay down and instantly fell asleep. I woke up to my best friend standing over me with his hands squeezed around my neck. We were both screaming at the top of our lungs and wrestling for our lives in the darkness of the room. We fought for a good minute, all the while screaming and destroying the room. Glass was shattered, the furniture was moved around the room. Eventually, my friend came to his senses and turned on the light while we both tried to make sense of this mess. My only recollection was waking up to my friend screaming and choking me by the neck. He seems to remember me standing over him and threatening him. He says he felt overcome with rage and attacked me at this point. We both went downstairs and tried to talk through it. We had a few main questions we could not answer. Number 1, we had only been asleep for about 10 minutes by the time we started fighting. REM sleep cannot occur within 10 minutes, so it cannot be dream-induced. 2, our other friends in the next room heard nothing and didn't wake up to the noise. After about 30 minutes downstairs, I felt the most horrifying dread I've ever experienced, thinking my death was certainly imminent. I went into full panic attack and started screaming to wake everyone up and leave the cabin. We all packed up and left within the hour. What are some possible explanations? The owners of the Airbnb checked the CO2 monitors and they were fine. They were never told the full story, but we agreed to pay damages for the room. Camping. My partner was at a bachelorette party at a campground. I was not invited for reasons of being a male. The audacity, yes, I know, but stayed up late in case anything happened. She calls me at 12 a.m., panic, saying, "He was just in here." And I had her recount everything after taking a few breaths. So, this is her story, not mine, but I was very much involved. After a fun day and night of drinking, playing games, hiking, swimming, they decided to call it a night. We will call my partner Mindy for anonymity. Mindy decided to finally take a shower after everyone else was turning in and walked to the camp bathrooms. She noticed an older white male sitting on a bench, but he doesn't pay her any mind, listening to something on his phone. She assumed that he was waiting for someone or was just sitting on a bench at night. Campgrounds are full of strange bench sitters. It's one of those timed showers where you push the button to get water to go, so her shower was very short, and she had brought her clothes, and so she got dressed. She heard something else and assumed another person needed to use the shower as she opened the curtain and sees the man peeking into shower stalls one at a time. She was the only person in there, and all she could do was stand still, mouth agape, staring at the man. He realized someone was standing there, and when he saw her, his eyes got super wide and he sprinted away. I told her that the ranger or camp staff should be nearby and to let them know immediately, or at least to call the police. But since she was at someone's celebration, she didn't want to disturb anything. I figured there was some shock and didn't want to raise her anxiety by arguing. Still, neither of us slept that night as I waited for her calls and she waited for a man to break into the tent. She tells the ranger the next morning and they say, "We've gotten several reports yesterday about this man, but no one can seem to find him." Flabbergasted that the man had once again caused discomfort. It seems to me that he was trying to muster courage to potentially do something worse, as it was a whole day of stalking, hiding, waiting, and sneaking into shower stalls, but that he was still timid. I'm just glad she came home safely, and I really wished I was there because I'm the guy who runs towards explosions. Literally happened once, and would love to sate my contained bloodlust by beating down a villain. Camping. This happened way back 2013 when I was in junior college. It was our college organization's annual art camp. For a short description, we're all in fine arts department, and our organization holds this art camp where there are seminars from our professors and mentors, and all in all, team building activities. It's usually set in recreational venues. And I've said earlier, I was in junior, and it was our year as the officers of the said organization. So we were the ones who chose the venue, planned the games, itineraries, and such. To give a brief description of the place, it's in a rural area around Laguna in the Philippines. It's a huge recreational area with hanging bridge leading to the campfire, pool area, and obstacle courses. In the middle of the venue, there's a huge open space function hall where the seminars were held. Our cabins were hidden by trees located far behind the hall. The first cabin was for the mentors and professors. The second was for the girls in my year and co-officers. The third was the sophomores and freshmen. The fourth was for the guys in my year and some freshmen. And the last two cabins were occupied by the higher year students. On the right side of the function hall, there's an outdoor lounge area with life-size chessboard games. If you walk straight further, there's an obstacle course area. Further from that was the pool and the foresty area where the campfire and hanging bridge was located. This particular story was experienced by my classmates. It was already night, around 8 p.m. Our scheduled seminar was already finished, and everyone was done with their dinner. Some of the students were chilling in the patio of their cabin. Some were walking around, and us, the officers, were busy with planning tomorrow's activities. The guys, we're gonna name them Gabe, Wally, Kev, Alan, and Hero, were chatting and chilling inside their cabin. One of them decided to explore around. Hero told them to go and play at the chessboard area. They decided to go out, except for one. Gabe approached Frank, a freshman, dozing at the top bunk. He asked if he wanted to come with them, but Frank was sleepy and he said no to them, turning his back against them. Before leaving, Gabe asked Frank if it's all right to borrow his slippers because he had none, and Frank signaled okay. So the five guys were heading out the cabin, fooling around and laughing. They looked around and saw students slowly heading back to each cabins to rest. They were almost a few yards away from the chessboard when Gabe noticed someone was walking parallel to them. The guy was heading to the large old coconut tree adjacent to the chessboard area. He was confused and stopped walking. Wally, Kev, Alan, and Hero noticed the walking guy as well. It was already dark around the minimal lights far from them. Gabe tried to rub his eyes and recognized the walking guy. It was Frank. They all shouted, "Frank, come here." Hero realized Frank stopped walking and turned towards them. No expression at all. Alan was confused as well and asked if it was really Frank. Gabe realized something creepy and faced the guys. "How could it be Frank when I'm wearing his only slippers?" he mumbled nervously. They all looked at the guy they were calling earlier and noticed it continued walking, and then suddenly disappeared behind the old coconut tree. The guys collectively gasped, run, and shouted loudly back to their cabin. When they reached the door, Wally opened it to find out Frank was sleeping deeply with his headphones on. They woke him up, slapped him softly, and asked him if he's okay or if he walked outside. Frank rubbing his eyes open, saying no confusedly. The five guys got scared so much they tried to outrun each other, heading to our cabin, telling us what happened. I was so scared, but not actually surprised since I felt creepy around the area during the nighttime. It felt really strange and off. I've had my experience with the night before, but I was not sure if it was paranormal. I was the only one awake that time. It was 2 a.m., and I hear giggling around our cabin, like kids running around chasing each other. I also noticed silhouettes walking past our screen door, though I personally tried to dismiss it and think of it as some of the students were still awake fooling around outside, but I wasn't able to sleep until 5 a.m. I believe that place had ghosts and elements in it, as per the recount of some of the students as well. You can really easily tell if there's something creepy in a place just by the feel it gives off. Camping. I honestly can't believe I'd forgotten about this. This happened back in the fall of either 2002 or 2003, when I was around 12 or 13 years old near Clinton Lake in Kansas on a Boy Scout campout. I still go backpacking and camping a lot, but this was the last camping trip I remember attending before moving states. We arrived at our campsite on a Friday and planned on staying through Saturday and leaving Sunday morning. I remember us having to set our tents up in the rain Friday evening, but Saturday was sunny and gorgeous. I don't remember every precise detail, but right before we went out to hike that morning, an old van, perhaps a late 70s model, pulled into a campsite within view of ours. These guys were hippies with a capital H, and that was my first exposure to what weed smells like when some of us asked if a skunk was nearby. They were too far away for us to hear any specific conversations, but even the adult leaders found this to be a funny sight. One of the leaders, I think, went over there to ask that they stop using drugs in front of us or to move campsite. When we got back from our day hike, those hippies were still at the same campsite and so baked they couldn't play their instruments with any skill. Here's where it got weird. By the time the sun was setting, the group of stoners had completely ditched their hippie attire and had dressed in total goth style. Some had makeup that made their faces unnaturally pale. Others had black trench coats on, and they must have had a stereo because all we could hear over there was grunge metal playing. That night, after we cooked and ate dinner, all the scouts, including myself, headed out into an open area of the campgrounds to play Capture the Flag. We collectively established the boundaries, which were still pretty close to the group of now goths, but it gave us a different angle of view to their site. I doubt they had any idea we were there, since we played with no flashlights. By this point, the grunge metal had been replaced by this creepy, ominous opera music. I succumbed to curiosity, but I wasn't about to sneak into their campsite. I just crept a little closer to see what they were doing. They had made a large campfire beyond legal limits, and I couldn't see any of the group. On a tree, I saw something that had made me initially freaked out, but I figured they were still feeling the weed and any other drugs they may have possibly taken for this to be real, and continued to play. I think we only played one game, then retired to our tents. At some point in the middle of the night, all of our adult leaders woke us up and told us to quickly and quietly pack up our things, take down our tents, and get back to the bus. As we were packing everything up, we couldn't help but notice the bonfire was still going strong, but the music had stopped and we heard people talking. The tone didn't sound like casual conversation either, but I couldn't hear specific words. I don't know how to describe it. Once everyone and everything was on the bus, the driver got us the hell out of there. The adults were abnormally quiet, and the scouts had congregated to the back of the bus. I don't remember if one of us told the adults about those guys, but we knew it had to have been regarding that strange group. A fellow scout from the other CTF team had also tried sneaking into their campsite and saw the same thing I did. Ever since, I'm inclined to think what we saw was real, and a reason for us cutting the trip short. Hanging from the tree, he and I saw a decapitated dog and 2 severed human legs. I never learned anything more about that night. This is the one and only Crawler's story. I've been staying at my grandmother's house for a little while. She lives deep in the sticks up northern Maine. Recently, we have been having problems with a fox taking the chickens, and we have lost about 10 now. So last night, June 27th, I was sitting upstairs with my girlfriend, and the dog started barking at around 10:30 p.m. I grabbed my shotgun and spotlight, then took the dog outside to check out what was up. I checked on the chickens, then locked them in since nothing was wrong, and then checked the wood line. The dog kept wanting to go into the woods, but I called him back and went back inside. Later, at 11 p.m., the dog started going crazy downstairs, barking and jumping at the door like someone was outside. I grabbed the gun, my light, and the dog before I went outside again. The dog went out and stared at the woods, but instead of pursuing what was there, he ran back towards the driveway. He eventually came back to me, but was really hesitant and kept looking at me. We walked towards the woods together, but the dog was still hesitant. This was very strange to me because usually he would run off if he thought anything was there. We got to the wood line on the far left, and the dog kept staring at me. I thought he wanted permission, so I told him to go, and he ran off for a moment before turning around and booking it back about 50 feet towards the house. I shined my light into the woods and saw 2 sharply oval-shaped blue eyes. I didn't exactly feel scared. I just felt not right. The eyes darted back behind a tree, and I started walking backwards with my shotgun off safety towards the house. With my back to the house, I walked until I hit the back side of the house. I quickly turned to run around the corner of the house towards the front door, and heard a man's voice call out, "Hey, you idiot," from behind me. It sounded like it was a football field away and almost echoed. I just ran inside. This morning, I wanted to know what the fuck that was. I went back outside this morning to just see where or what that thing could have been. Where I saw it was about 8 feet off the ground. I even told my grandmother about it. She said she knows what's there, but it doesn't bother her, so she doesn't bother it. My girlfriend and I wanted to do some research, and so we did. We read a lot of stories, a lot like mine. So, if anyone knows more, we would love to hear your own encounters. Crazy exes. My ex-girlfriend accused my best friend of sexual assault, then tried to make me choose between her and him. In the long list of crazy shit she did during our relationship, this has to be in the gold medal position. Buckle in, kids. It's about to be crazy up in here. We were at a library helping blind kids to read Braille. Not really. We were at a pub, and there wasn't a blind kid in sight. For all you pun lovers out there, you were so very welcome. My then girlfriend had come up to my hometown to see the sights. Then, realizing quite quickly that there were none, we started to drink, hence the pub. Joined by a handful of my mates, it was a lovely little gathering with more than a few laughs and stories going around the table, which was good. See, introducing a new partner to an established circle of friends can be confronting. But she was a bigger hit than a new cellmate in a shower block D, so everything seemed great. And by the time the night ended, she and I went home with smiles on our faces, looking back on a night well enjoyed. Of course, we did stop smiling almost immediately. That was always the way with us. Because while we had our moments of bliss, we had an equal number of fire and brimstone, and I never knew when those moments would arrive. At least if you're being shot at through the tress, you know where to aim your defenses. It's when the jungle falls quiet, you should be terrified, not knowing when or where the next attack will occur. And so I often quietly tiptoed through the jungle of our relationship, hoping not to step on a mine or get mauled by a tiger. And still, just as I felt safe and secure, boom, I was dragged into quicksand. "You're catching up with your friends again? It's very disrespectful." That was a common catchphrase. That's really disrespectful. I'd spent the better part of the week staying at her house. She lived 30 minutes away or so by train. So by the time the weekend rolled around, a little time with the boys felt exciting. Now, I'll admit, I'm a big believer that the space you ask for in a relationship is returned tenfold when you come back to your partner feeling energized and romantic. So a little time away actually leads to a closer relationship together. But she didn't see it that way. She saw it as disrespectful. Whether I was spending too much time with the boys or whether my night out was justified, I'm really not sure. But I am sure of what happened next. "I can't believe you want to spend time with them, especially after what happened last week," she said. Now, here's a teaser of a sentence. It's the clickbait of the relationship world. You think you can walk away after that line? Good luck. So I took the bait. "What happened last week?" I replied cautiously, knowing full well to think through my words like a bomb disposal expert picking at live wires in the field. "I didn't want to say anything," she went on, "but your friend Adrian followed me into the pub bathroom last week." I listened intently. "He came into the women's bathroom and held me against the wall. He said, 'You look amazing tonight.' He put his hand under my dress." Now, I'm not often short for words. In fact, I No, heaps of them. Over 200 to be exact. But I was floored at this news. I didn't know what to say, so I went into protective boyfriend mode with all stations on high cuddle alert. I canceled my plans with the boys and shut off my phone, spending the entire weekend with her instead. The next week, back at home, I hit up my mate. No word of a lie. It was the single most uncomfortable conversation I've ever had since a cleaner asked me why I'd been in a hospital for so long. Mate, I've got advanced leukemia. Can you just please mop the floor and go away? I was straight up with my friend, though, because I didn't know how else to approach it. I don't know how to say this, so I'll just say it. My girlfriend says you touched her inappropriately at the pub last week, so I need to know what happened. Right now. You could have heard a pin drop, followed by someone with very nimble fingers whispering, "Sorry, I dropped my pen," followed by the aforementioned pen being placed back in a pen pouch. That's how quiet it was between us. My mate looked at me and placed his hand in his hands with disbelief, firmly denying anything had happened at all. Her irresistible claim against his immovable defense. Fuck. You're all here looking for the chuckle, so I won't go into the days and weeks of back and forth that followed that conversation. But it turned out to be 100% a lie. My girlfriend had created a divide between her and the rest of my circle of friends that, to be honest, would never truly heal between us all. We all tried our best to move past that moment. And to give some closure to you all, she admitted the accusation of inappropriate touching was a lie, fueled by anger at me spending time away from her. But it was an uneasy truth, to be honest. In targeting a friend of close to 20 years and accusing him of a form of sexual assault, she had well and truly drawn a line in the sand. Those words, even said in anger, carry a hell of a lot of power. Maybe more so in 2019's social climate. In the distressing, emotionally draining weeks that followed her lie, she'd thrown an ultimatum into the universe, an unspoken, "It's either me or him." She would take back those words when the truth eventually came out. But as far as batshit crazy goes, that right there was the craziest fucking thing my ex ever did to me. And even worse, to my mate. Crazy exes. This will be the first time I'm actually telling this story, so don't judge me too bad. I'll start by saying he wasn't really an ex in the most literal sense, as he wouldn't date me, but we spent all of our free time together for almost a year and were obviously involved. I guess that was one sign of the type of guy he was or is. But I was 17 at the time. It doesn't help that I'm highly submissive and non-confrontational. I'm going to say 3 things because all 3 were completely crazy and messed up. Number 1, after we had sex for the first time, no condom either, he wasted no time telling me after that he has herpes, but that he didn't want to tell me because he was afraid I wouldn't have sex with him. Asshole. Number 2, we got a hotel room for the night because we were going to do a rape fantasy on a very low budget. I was stupid. Anyway, beforehand, I told him he could do anything, but not to do anal. He has a huge and I had never done it before. He agreed, of course, and after slapping me around a bit and hitting me with a thin plastic rod, he went to shove it right in my ass. I panicked and broke out of the, thankfully, cheap handcuffs and got away from him. When I asked him about it, he said, "It wouldn't be a rape if I didn't do the one thing you didn't want me to do." Number 3. When we were hanging out at his house watching TV, he had a breakout on his inner thighs. We both thought it was from his herpes, and I obviously tried to avoid touching it. He was on the couch and I was sitting on the floor in front of him. He got pissed off about it and stood up and began rubbing his thighs all over me. Very shortly after this, we split ways for good. A few weeks later, I came down with scabies. Look them up. The most awful thing I have ever had to deal with in my life. I never even thought that I might have gotten it from him until a few years later when he started talking to me again and mentioned it. That's not even everything, but those are certainly the craziest shit someone has done to me that I would consider to be an ex. Crazy exes. I was 3 months pregnant with our second child. At my first prenatal appointment, which I attended alone, my doctor found a large lump in my breast. She tried to reassure me that it was probably related to my pregnancy. Still, she was clearly concerned and found a surgeon to see me almost immediately. 3 weeks away, which was fast in our city. I left the appointment in shock. Found a payphone to call my husband. I told him what the doc had found. He said nothing for a few seconds, then said he had to go and hung up on me. He didn't say a thing to me when I got home that night, either. He pretended it wasn't happening for the next 3 weeks, until the appointment. He told me he didn't plan to go with me because work was busy, and why should he take time off before we knew if I was sick? I flipped. What woman wouldn't? He attended under protest. I was wasting his time. As it turned out, the surgeon was equally concerned. Within 3 days, I was booked for surgery. I had to force him to go with me to the lumpectomy. Seeing as I was pregnant, he needed to be there in case the tumor biopsy was malignant, and more serious surgery was necessary. At this point, I was in my 4th month. I was terrified that I'd lose my life and leave my babies, or survive the cancer and lose the baby inside of me. In fact, abortion had been suggested. I've never felt so alone. I was lucky. The tumor was benign. My baby was born, but a different cancer took hold in my marriage. Unbelievably, I stayed for several more years because I had 2 small children. The eldest had autism and the youngest is bipolar. Their dad denied those problems too, so it was on my plate alone to manage their conditions. He never met any of their docs. He never attended a single appointment, even though I worked full-time and he had a flexible schedule and worked from home. I had to quit my job and find part-time work in order to manage their numerous appointments, meaning that then I was financially dependent on my ex, whereas I hadn't been before. I had no other options. I went into family therapy with the boys. Dad didn't find it convenient to attend. Shocker. He also didn't like the therapist who asked him some tough questions in the first and only session he attended. I got myself therapy because I couldn't manage all of it my own. Ultimately, my kids were so unstable, I thought it was better to stay married no matter how painful. My therapist was dubious. When my youngest was in 3rd grade, I caught my husband having an affair with one of my best friends. We tried marriage counseling, but he couldn't admit to the affair, even though he admitted it to me, and the evidence was irrefutable. It was nuts. At that point, I had to go. It wasn't easy. Both boys took it hard. Over the next 4 to 7 years, my youngest ended up in a psych hospital 5 times, and my oldest attempted suicide and was hospitalized with severe depression. My ex still wouldn't meet their doctors. He accused me of pathologizing our sons. The only thing wrong with them was Me. In which case you'd think he might try to get custody. But no. He moved more than an hour away and spent minimal time with the boys, even skipping our oldest son's 8th grade graduation, after promising him on the phone the night before that he would be there. I guess there's more than one thing, but it's hard to separate it all out. And there's still more, but I think this is plenty. Creepy encounters. Many years ago, when my daughter was potty training, a friend recommended I keep a travel potty with me. It saved me from rushing to find a restroom and avoiding stopping in anywhere questionable with a toddler. We would drive about 40 minutes to pick up my husband on his lunch break. That afternoon, we were headed back to drop him off to work and were only about a block from the restaurant when my daughter said she had to go. The area we had just headed into was a large business park, and there were lots of very large buildings to the left and the right. I saw one, and the parking lot looked empty. I pulled over to the side of the building and parked at a curb. I had 2 car seats taking up my back seat, and my husband in the passenger seat, so I took my daughter out of the car and set her up in the trunk to use the potty. I had just got her seated, and she was looking uncomfortable and covering her face and looking down. I looked behind me, and I see a woman walking up to me. It was summer at the time and very warm. She was wearing a jean skirt and tank top and had a cross-body purse. She looked at my daughter and said, "Don't be embarrassed. We all go through it," and laughed. She said she needed a ride to the freeway and asked if I could take her. I told her that I was sorry, but I couldn't. She started to seem bothered and asked why I couldn't take her. I said my back seat is full, so I didn't have room for her. She snapped back. "So you're telling me you put your daughter in the front seat then?" I told her no, that my husband was in the front seat. As soon as she heard that, I wasn't alone and had my husband with me. She started to slowly back away and walking down the street she came from. As she was walking away, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I used to be from here, but not anymore," and quickly walked off. If she would have made a left on the cross street, she was walking towards when going towards my car. There were restaurants and gas stations a block up. Plenty of people to ask for a ride. I still am so grateful my husband was with me that day. I don't know what her true intentions were, but getting to a populated area didn't seem to be one of them. Creepy encounters. One day I was with my cousins and we were riding our bikes around this abandoned track field with a bunch of trees. An hour or so passed and this middle-aged man enters through the gate. He had an orange bag on, a blue shirt, and some blue jeans on. He also had a black cap on. He sits down on a log and watches us the whole time. Me and my cousins were obviously creeped out, but we just ignored him. He seemed to be eating his food or whatever, so we just thought he was minding his own business and we were just being paranoid. After like 3 hours, we were all pretty thirsty and tired. There was a store right around the corner where we could have gotten some snacks and drinks, so we decided to leave. It was getting late anyways. Mind you, the man was still there just watching us. While leaving, I ran over a rock and my bike leaped forward, a little almost knocking me off my bike. I laughed it off and we went on. Once we reached the store, I reached inside my pocket for my phone. It wasn't there. I asked my cousins if they had it. They said no. So I frantically told my cousin to go run back and check if I had dropped it. And he did. He comes back after 5 minutes and says there's no sign of my phone. I started freaking out and I run back to the track field to look for it myself with my bike. I searched the grass, the trees, everything. But I still couldn't find my phone. Then I started realizing something. The man was still there. watching me frantically, looking for my phone. He just sat there and stared at me. Both my cousins came back from the store and find me still looking for my phone. My older cousin finally pulled out her phone and tries to track mine down. Thankfully, I always had on my location. The GPS on her phone showed that my phone wasn't far from me, and it was where I was at. I was about to declare victory until my cousin whispered in my ear, "What if that guy has it?" The idea wasn't completely absurd, but he was actually sitting in the area where my phone claimed to be, according to the GPS. But I just brushed it off and told her that I wasn't going to accuse a random stranger of stealing my phone. She calls me stupid, and we just kept searching. As I was still searching, my bigger cousin kept a close eye on the guy, which he was still chilling over there. A few moments later, he starts walking away. My cousin looks down at her phone up at the guy right when he started moving. My phone, on her GPS, started moving as well in the same direction he was moving. So, my cousin tapped my shoulder and showed me what was happening. I started to freak out, and my heart dropped. I didn't have an idea of how to deal with this situation. My cousin ended up telling me that we had to confront him or I would never have my phone back, and we could not let him leave with it because it was my phone after all. So I did just that. I slowly ran up to him and politely approached the man. "Excuse me, sir, have you seen a pink phone anywhere?" He slowly turned around and just looked me up and down with this sinister, mocking, smirking look on his face. He denies that he had ever seen a phone and started walking away. The GPS is literally moving once he started walking away again, my cousin says. At this point, I was pissed. Not the fact that he took my phone, but the fact that he lied to my face. He looked at me dead in the eyes and told me that he didn't or hadn't seen my phone. I gave him a chance to come clean. I could have been more aggressive, but I wasn't. I was a polite and patient person, even though he was the one with my phone. At this point, I was pissed, so I screamed, "Hey, stop!" He stops in his tracks, but slowly puts his hand in his pocket. I thought fast and assumed that he was going to pull out a weapon, so I stepped back. Not to my surprise, he pulls out my phone and hands it to me then, nervously laughing and apologizing. "You are lucky we didn't call the police," my cousin says. The word police clearly scared him, and he started apologizing while he was fleeing. My cousin was fuming, and so was I. I started cussing at him and yelling, and I was just overwhelmed about the situation. What would you have done in the same situation? Creepy encounters. I posted this a while ago about a creepy man on the bus, and today it occurred to me that I have an even creepier bus encounter from when I was 19. So, here goes. I had just spent the night at my friend's house in the suburbs along with a group of friends, and the four of us were riding the bus home the next morning after a fun night. Since it was bright and early, I'd let my guard down, slumped down on a window seat in the mostly empty bus. My friend was sitting next to me on the aisle seat, and our other two friends were sitting across from us. The bus was rocking gently, and I was in a sleepy state when my friend grabs my hand and squishes it really tight. She wasn't saying anything, but her breathing became fast, as if she was panicking. So I turned to her and I saw a piece of meat dangling, and it was attached to an older man in his 50s. And this guy was standing on the side of the seat next to my friend, grabbing her thigh and full-on beating his thing while the rest of us slept and she stood frozen. There were barely any people on the bus. I felt like I wanted to throw up. I got up and pushed the guy's chest as hard as I could, and he stumbled back. and tried to keep himself from falling. My friend had woken up at this point, and he grabbed the guy up by his neck and berated him and called him names. By this time, everyone had noticed the commotion, but unfortunately, that is not uncommon in my country. So, people were disgusted but not surprised. As soon as the next stop came, the guy practically jumped to get out as we all comforted my poor friend. I had forgotten all about this story until she reminded me the other day, and the disgust came back and washed over me. What in the actual fuck, man? Cryptids. So I've told my friends and family this story, and they just look at me like I'm crazy. I ended up telling my wife when we were moving out of the house that this happened in. I lived in Nevada with my wife in a newly constructed house that was 3 floors. The master bedroom was on the 3rd floor, and there was no door up to the master floor. It was just open. Like a loft, but it was a full-sized area, not a converted attic or anything of the sort. This is pretty common in Nevada, so that they can squeeze as many thin, taller houses in a lot as possible. Anyway, one night, about a month into moving into the house, we're both asleep. I wake up in the middle of the night at around 2 to 4-ish and see all the way at the other side of the room a little creature, all black. I couldn't make out any features or eyes or anything of the sort, but it was small, maybe 2 feet tall, and had 2 arms and legs like a person, but was wider and didn't move like a person. It was unnaturally fast. It ran quickly to the edge of the bed, and then I could tell it was looking right at me. I could move, and I very consciously remember thinking, ugh, I do not have time for this. I remember it peered over the mattress and had a longer nose, but for some reason, it was not able or allowed to get on the bed. I watched it for about 10 seconds, then was like, okay, if it can't get up, I'm going back to sleep and rolling over. So I rolled over and nothing else happened that night. Pretty anticlimactic story, I know, but that's what happened to me that night. I never saw anything in that house again, except for that one night. I was definitely awake, and I could move though, so it was not a bout of sleep paralysis. I've had that once, and that is much worse and terrifying. Just wondering if there's a name for what I saw, or if anyone else has had anything similar happen to them. Cryptids. So my great-grandpa fought in World War II. He was drafted in 1943 when he was just 23 years of age. He's 103 years old now. Just a few days ago, he told me a story that he says was the most horrifying experience in his life. I asked him if it was about Japanese soldiers because those guys were vicious back in the day. He told me no, it was something else. I don't know if this story is true or not, but it did give me the chills. Feel free to debunk this if you want. He said that nobody ever believed their story, but he still remembers it clear as day, and it gives him nightmares still to this day. Okay, so this is the story. In 1943, he was stationed in the Philippines, along with others, to hold off the Japanese. However, one day, him and his friend Samuel, who unfortunately passed away decades ago, got separated from their platoon. They were in a province making their way through the forest within the mountain area when they both got lost and were separated. Gigi forgot which province it was, but he said there were a lot of forests and villages. So he and Samuel were looking and calling out for their comrades. So they ventured deeper and deeper till they reached the end of the forest. I asked him, "Why didn't you just radio your platoon?" He told me that he did, but for some unknown reason, the communications were scrambled and unintelligible. It concerned both him and Samuel, but Samuel said that they needed to keep calm and tread carefully in case they run into Japanese soldiers. So they both made it out of the forest, and then they noticed that the sun was about to set. Gigi told Samuel that they needed to set up a camp, and Samuel agreed. That's when Gigi noticed something was off in the distance. It was a small wooden hut. They both decided to camp inside, so they made their way over to the hut. They knocked on the door and checked the place, but there was no sign of people anywhere. But there were clothes scattered around the place. Gigi says that maybe they fled in panic, to which Samuel agreed with him. So Gigi and Samuel set up camp and ate dinner. Samuel proposed the idea of taking shifts throughout the night to keep a lookout just in case they got shagged in their sleep by the Japanese. Gigi agreed to the idea. So they both woke each other up and took each place as a lookout while the other person slept. When Gigi was sleeping, Samuel abruptly woke him up and told him, "I spotted movement." Gigi quickly grabbed his rifle and asked where. Samuel gave the binoculars to Grandpa and pointed it to the direction. "I saw them in the field, 300 yards away," Samuel said. Gigi looked through the binoculars in the direction Samuel pointed at. At first, he didn't see anything, but then he spotted something moving in the dark. However, when Gigi looked closer, it was just a wild boar. It's just a pig," Grandpa told Samuel. Samuel took the binoculars to see for himself. "That's weird. It's just standing there," Samuel said. Grandpa looked at Samuel in confusion and asked what that meant. Samuel then said that the boar wasn't moving or anything. It was just standing there, staring at them from afar, and that it was starting to weird him out. Grandpa just laughed it off and told Samuel that it was probably just his mind playing tricks on him. But then, something odd happened. The oil lamp that served as their source of light inside the hut started to slowly go out. Grandpa went over to light it back up, then afterward went back to his sleeping bag. But then the light suddenly went out again. Grandpa checked up on it again, thinking that the oil probably went out. But the strange thing was that there was plenty of oil. Gigi lit it back up again and went back to his sleeping bag. And then the flame went out yet again. That's when a terrified Samuel frantically went up to him and said, "It's gone." "What the hell are you talking about?" Gigi asked him. "The pig. It just disappeared into thin air." At this point, Grandpa was also starting to get freaked. Gigi then asked him to explain. Samuel said that he was watching the boar through the binoculars when it suddenly just vanished out of existence. Suddenly, a loud thud came from above them, as if something landed on the roof. Great Gramps and Samuel grabbed their rifles. "We need to get the fuck out of here," Samuel said. Grandpa said the rest of the events that happened are said to be one of the worst nightmares in his entire life. Gigi told Samuel not to panic, to lay low and to stay quiet. And so they did, while tightly gripping their guns close. After a few moments of silence, Samuel started screaming. Grandpa turned on his light and saw something straight out of a horror movie. Something that looked like a tongue was lodged into Samuel's neck. His friend was screaming in pain, trying to remove it from his neck. Gigi snapped out of his shock and shot at the ceiling multiple times, trying to hit whatever the tongue belonged to. After a few more shots, the tongue released Samuel and slowly retracted back into the hole in the ceiling. Samuel was gripping the side of his neck tightly while screaming. Blood trickled down his neck. Grandpa put a cloth against the wound and told him to keep pressure on it. Afterwards, they collected all their things, exited the cabin, and made a break for it. Grandpa turned around and shined his light on the hut's roof. And what he saw, he described it as the most evil-looking and ugliest thing he has ever seen. I asked him to describe what it looked like. It was humanoid. It had 2 gigantic wings that were bigger than its own body. The wings looked like a combination of a bat's wings and a hawk's. Its eyes were blood red and glowed in the dark. Skin black as coal, wild, unkempt hair, and huge fangs that were visible even though its mouth was closed. It was just perching on the roof, staring at them. Grandpa acted quickly. He raised his rifle and began shooting at the thing, unloading all the rounds in the gun's chamber. Samuel also did the same thing. But, to their astonishment, the monster was unfazed. It just continued to stare at them unbothered. At this point, Gramps and Samuel started screaming like maniacs while running for the hills. By some miracle, the creature didn't pursue them. They were both so scared that they didn't care if they ran into their enemy as long as they didn't encounter that thing again. They managed to make it till morning and came across a small village where they rested in. That's when they learned from one of the locals that what attacked them was called an aswang, and that they were very common in the countryside. The locals told them that they were all in God's favor because they survived. After a couple of days, they were reunited with their platoon. When they told the story, only a few believed them, while the others thought that they probably were drunk and ran into enemy gunfire, hence the injury on Samuel's neck. After the war ended, they all went home, but he could never forget the horrifying encounter that gave him severe PTSD. Samuel, unfortunately, passed away in the 80s due to a stroke. His story honestly freaks me out as well. I just spent the past hour Googling aswangs. What are you all's thoughts on this? What do you think the creature really was? Cryptids. I have a lot of stories, but this story was when I was standing up, not in bed, and with a friend who experienced this with me. This happened in Pennsylvania, in the Allegheny National Forest in 2009-2010. I really don't remember. It was when the National Rainbow Gathering was there. I was hitchhiking the East Coast at the time and made my way there. Ran into a buddy I'd met in Florida a few months before, and she was there with a friend, so they adopted me and I camped with them. Me and Anna decided to camp alongside the main trail to get away from all the thousands of hippies. The main trail goes from a camp, the parking lot, to the main circle in the heart of the gathering, and it's a couple miles worth of trek. So we were out there alone besides the main trail traffic. It was dusk, and we were having a heavy talk about spirituality and what not hippie stuff when we decided to go down to the main circle to get some food. We were standing up, and I began to stomp out the little twig fire we had when Anna said, "Do you hear that?" I stopped and listened, and it sounded like someone walking in the forest towards us. At this moment, some people in the main trail had stopped and were smoking cigarettes and were talking amongst themselves, oblivious to us. Me and Anna listened to these footsteps quickly moving into view, and we could see nothing. The footsteps kept going, and there was nothing there. My mind was misfiring, trying to figure it out. We could actually see the footfalls of twigs snapping and leaves moving. Whatever it was went right up to those people on the trail and seemed to slow its pace. Then it just came right up to me and Anna and slowed down like it was checking us out. I wasn't scared, just really confused, frozen to the spot. The entire time, Anna was fumbling with a keychain she had with a million things attached to it, and finally found the little flashlight and shown it and said, "Hey," whatever this was. It was a few feet from me, bounded off up the hill very quickly. If I'd wanted to run after it, I couldn't have. It was too fast. Like the steps became machine gun steps. Me and Anna took off down the hill, totally panicked. To me, it sounded like a child speed walking, if that makes sense. The steps were short, but fast, almost robotic-like, or insect-like. This really happened, but Anna would refuse to talk about it after. She was totally freaked. I had to go back up and pack up the campsite. Driving at night. It was sometime in the late 90s of the last century. I was a young man and the internet was still new territory. In search of the great love, or perhaps only in search of sexual gratification, turned out that the AOL chat rooms were a true treasure trove. Here you could talk to women without first having to visually convince them, and what was even better, here you could impress them with polished sentences, clever or witty statements, and if I found one thing easy, then the written word. So many things happened, and I was visiting a complete stranger almost every weekend in another city. Unfortunately, these meetings meant I spent several hundred kilometers and many hours every weekend on the highway, because only in the rarest of cases the date was in the immediate vicinity. The internet knows neither borders or distances. It happened that on this special weekend, I once again covered endless kilometers on a German motorway, only to meet a very likable chat acquaintance in real life. You all know that for sure. After some time in the car, you think about nothing special. You sing along to the radio and you beat up the poor steering wheel with bumbling drums. You are the long-distance flow. The kilometers pull past. One exit is like the other. The rest stops are indistinguishable, and you overtake hundreds of trucks, and you witness the tank needle as it moves to the E, to the fuel gauge, like any unstoppable snail. Then, the unlikely happened. I was driving through a construction site. The lanes were severely narrowed. 60 kilometers top speed was prescribed. I drove maybe 5 kilometers faster than the big 18-tonners next to me, which I comfortably passed. One of his tires almost as tall as my complete Volkswagen Beetle. I was just at the height of the cab with an incredibly loud bang, a veritable explosion. The front tire next to me shattered off the lorry. Rubber parts flew on my front and side windows, and a kind of foggy smoke enveloped my car as almost 100 psi made their way out of their Kachu prison. That's it, I thought, and in a few moments, the realization of my imminent death manifested in my head. My co-driver put his hand on my shoulder and said in a sonorous and gentle voice, "Stay calm." I felt a warm, comforting feeling settle over my chest from my shoulder, and I concentrated on keeping the car straight and on the narrow lane, neither the sight boundary nor the truck to touch. And, indeed, the fog went away. The last little black rubber parts were blown off my bonnet, and I could see the road again. In the rearview mirror, I saw the trucker bring his cart to a halt, and I, too, ran to the right and set my engine down with trembling hands. With a thick lump in my throat and suffocating voice, I stuttered a "thank you" to my passenger as the realization ran down my back in an icy chill. I was alone in the car. A glance at the passenger seat confirmed that, and the empty, cold leatherette of the passenger seat suddenly made everything seem totally surreal around me. There was a knock on my disc, and the question, "Are you okay?" brought me back to reality. To this day, I have not told this story to anyone as it really happened. Every time I skip the part with the passenger, I cannot describe how big of a relief it is to share my story with you. Driving at night. Okay, so let me start by giving you some background information. My mom was dating my dad at this time, and I was about 10. He lived with his parents at the time since his dad was sick, and since it wasn't really that far from our house, we decided to visit him there. We had dinner, stayed for a while. He gave us grits, gave me a cow plushie I still have to this day. Everything goes well. Then it gets late, around 11 p.m., and we decide to leave. It's literally pitch black. Also, may I remind you that it's probably mid-December. No snow falling at the moment. So it's icy and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. So, like any other normal human being would do, my mom puts on her high beams. Something I forgot to add is that she would actually shut them off when she got close to the car. It's not like she was blinding him. She only had them on when she was far behind the car. You'll understand why I said this in a minute. We get behind this black car in which the driver is acting like a jerk and won't drive like a normal human. They're speeding up to almost 70 miles per hour and then slowing to almost a stop. My mom can't turn because the road we're on is rural and there's nothing but cow fields on either side. There was nowhere to go, so we end up behind him with an extremely aggravated driver behind us. It gets a bit harder to see again, so my mom puts her high beams back on, a fair distance away from the black car. Because why wouldn't you if you were far enough away? But of course, the driver in front of us stopped. Completely stopped. Then his huge, burly, bigger built man starts sprinting over to our car at full speed. I started screaming and crying as I see that he is holding a blunt object in his hand. My mom recoils as she fears for the worst as she looks around, trying to figure out how she could escape. There's a car coming from the other way, so she can't turn around. His car is in front of us, so she can't hit the gas. There's only fenced-off fields around us. He pounds on the window like the FBI and starts screaming and swearing at us. He begins threatening us, saying that he'd kill my mom if he ever caught her with her high beams on again. Of course, I scream and cry, being a small, skinny 10-year-old girl, not knowing if me and my mom would ever get home. I didn't have my dad's phone number memorized at that time, and I didn't exactly remember how to work my mom's phone, so I don't know how to call my dad. The man's body language was just off. I'm not sure if he was drunk or high, but it seemed that way. He looked at me for a second, which scarred me and my mom rightfully. My mom is also a small lady, and our car wasn't that fast, so she wasn't sure what to do because neither fight or flight would work at this point. The blunt object in his hand turned out to be a huge flashlight, which he began to repeatedly hit the window with. He also started flashing the light in my mom's face to blind her. How ironic. My mom yelled at him to get lost as he hit the window harder, about to break it. Thankfully, the car behind us started to lay on the horn, and he got back into his car out of fear and sped off. My mom called my dad, who drove around almost all night to look for the guy, but didn't find anything. I don't remember if we called the cops or not. I just remember crying into my pillow all night long. So, road rage drunk guy, let's not meet again, and I do mean ever again. Also, to the car behind us who scared the guy into his car, thank you. You most likely saved our lives. Driving at night. Sometime in the late 2000s, my family was coming back from visiting some extended family. This was in a somewhat rural and industrial Midwest state. My memory is horrible, but I remember this extremely brief encounter so vividly. My dad was driving with my grandma, mom, brother, and me in the car. I was in my late teens at this time. It was dusk and would soon be getting dark. We were on a back road because my grandma was navigating and didn't know what a highway was. There are some industrial buildings and stuff around, but it's all just shut down and abandoned, and they are few and far in between. So we are cruising along, and my grandma spots a person in one of those big electric wheelchairs that lays back. They are just sitting in an empty lot by the road. It was so out of place, and there was nobody around. It was starting to get really dark. My grandma was a saint and really wanted to stop and see if they needed help, but I had a horrible feeling and felt sick just thinking about it. I voiced my concerns about how something seems very wrong. Luckily, my dad agreed with me and did not stop. It was a fraction of a second encounter. We didn't even slow down, but we tried to figure out what to do for a couple of minutes after we passed. I'm sorry if I'm a horrible person for not wanting to help, but I had that nauseous feeling that this was something bad. I don't know if it was a trap or someone who needed help or someone just hanging out for some reason, but it literally scared all of us, aside from my grandma, to death. And that, dear Embers, brings a close to part 1 of your top favorite true stories. I would like to take a moment here and thank all of the subscribers of the channel. They will be here on the screen. Thank you all so much for your continued support. You are the glue that holds this channel together, and I appreciate every day the support you give this channel. Thank you. To the newbies and the peekaboos, thank you all so much, and everyone else. For without you all, I would not have a voice, and this channel would not exist. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these collections. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. I will be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.